Paul McCartney, born James Paul McCartney on June 18, 1942, in Liverpool, England, has lived a life that intertwines music, love, and loss. From his early days in post-war Liverpool to becoming one of the most celebrated figures in music history, Paul's journey is marked by both triumphs and heartache. Growing up as the son of a jazz musician and a nurse, Paul was introduced to creativity and hardship early on. His mother's untimely death when he was just 14 left an emotional scar that influenced much of his songwriting. Yet through that pain, he found a voice that would go on to echo around the world. It wasn't long before his serendipitous meeting with John Lennon led to the formation of the Beatles, a band that would forever alter the landscape of popular music. Now at 83, Paul reflects on the relationship that quietly shaped his life the most. His deep bond with George Harrison, Liverpool to Hamburg. The early years of brotherhood. Paul's friendship with George Harrison began on the streets of Liverpool, where the two young musicians met and formed an unlikely bond. George, the youngest Beatle, was known for his quiet intensity and natural musical talent, which was often understated but always vital to the band's sound. As Paul recalls, George was a rare blend of shyness and unshakable confidence, a combination that set him apart in the world of rock and roll. The Beatles' early days were spent performing in Liverpool's clubs, and later, the gritty music scene of Hamburg. It was here that George's guitar playing began to take shape, adding depth to the band's evolving sound. To Paul, George wasn't just a bandmate, he was like a younger brother, someone Paul felt a responsibility to protect and guide through the early hardships of their journey. The rise of the Beatles, a relationship under pressure. As the Beatles' fame exploded, so did the internal pressure within the band. Paul, often seen as the creative leader, found himself shouldering much of the responsibility. But George, though younger, began to emerge as a musical force in his own right. His growing curiosity and exploration of new musical sounds pushed the boundaries of the Beatles' music. Paul remembers how George's discovery of new chords could completely shift the direction of a song, bringing fresh energy to their work. However, as George's musical voice became stronger, so did the tension between him and Paul. The dynamics began to shift subtly, with Paul recognizing that his perfectionism sometimes stifled George's creativity. It wasn't always a conflict, but rather a quiet frustration that arose as George sought more space to express himself and contribute fully to the band's vision. The creative rift, when the quiet Beatle wanted to be heard. For years, Paul's role as the primary songwriter and producer in the Beatles meant that he and John Lennon were the dominant voices in the group. While John brought raw emotion and rebellion, Paul offered melody and structure. In the midst of this, George, the quiet Beatle, often found himself overshadowed. Paul admits that at times, he didn't fully understand how deeply George needed to express himself. He recalls, "I was probably too bossy." The tension between Paul's need for control and George's growing desire to assert his own voice created a rift that would shape their relationship for years. It wasn't until George began to write songs like Something and Here Comes the Sun that Paul fully realized George's potential as a songwriter. These tracks were more than just contributions. They were the moments when George's musical genius finally shone through. Reunion and reconciliation, the final years of friendship. In the final years of George's life, as he battled cancer, Paul found a way to reconnect with the friend he had once unintentionally sidelined. Their reunion was simple and unpretentious, two old friends spending time together, discussing life, family, and the things that mattered most. Paul recalls how they didn't talk about the Beatles or their past fame. Instead, they shared intimate conversations about gardens, family, and the peace George had found. In one of the most poignant moments of their reunion, Paul and George held hands, a silent acknowledgement of the years they had shared and the healing they had found. Paul left knowing that their friendship had come full circle and there was nothing left unsaid between them. This quiet reconciliation was a turning point for Paul, bringing him the peace he had long sought. The meaning of Something. George's true legacy, Paul McCartney, has long performed George Harrison's songs in concert, but now he sees it as more than a tribute. When he plays Something, often starting on a ukulele, George's favorite instrument, Paul feels George's spirit alongside him. He imagines George laughing at him as if saying, "You finally got it right." For Paul, performing George's music isn't simply about honoring a friend, it's a way of keeping his spirit alive. In playing George's songs, Paul reconnects with a part of himself that George helped shape. George's influence taught Paul to slow down, appreciate the simplicity of life, and recognize the beauty in the everyday moments. By sharing this with the world, Paul offers a rare glimpse into the depth of his connection with George, a connection that goes beyond music and is rooted in love and respect. A quiet truth, the love behind the music. What Paul reveals now is a gentle but profound truth. George Harrison was more than just the quiet Beatle. He was a creative force, a spiritual guide, and in many ways, a brother. Paul's honesty about their relationship speaks to the complexities of love, creativity, and human connection. George's desire for recognition, his quiet frustration, and his immense resilience all mattered deeply, even if they were often overshadowed by the louder personalities in the band. Paul's regret about not giving George enough space is not about self-pity. It's a confession of love, a realization that only comes after years of reflection. For Paul, acknowledging George's importance is a way to honor the man he always admired but didn't always fully understand. It is a final act of love, years in the making, from one brother to another. Outro, the legacy of brotherhood. Paul McCartney's life has been defined by brilliance, endurance, and transformation. Beneath the fame and the music, however, lies a deeper narrative, the story of a friendship that shaped Paul in ways he now fully admits. George Harrison wasn't just a bandmate, he was a teacher, a spiritual guide, and a brother in every sense. In the final chapter of his life, Paul has chosen to speak with honesty, tenderness, and gratitude, reflecting on the true legacy of the Beatles, not just their music, but the bonds they formed. When Paul plays George's songs, he does more than perform. He reunites with the friend who helped shape him. George Harrison was never just the quiet Beatle, he was a brother, and his love, like his music, endures forever.